Good morning, afternoon, evening, wherever you are. I literally just uploaded a new video not too long ago, and when I thought I could finally sit down to relax and have a wonderful day off, Hoyoverse had to rain in my parade and gave me another piece of lore drop for me to work on. I'm pretty sure you have seen my shorts and community posts not too long ago talking about this, and you know I was yapping and have my knees trembling over this beauty of a man. Look at him, suited, elegant, demure, stoic, short hair. This man is a full package for me. Before you're asking about Alhaitham, all I can say is, who says you can't have two anime husbands, Anyways, jokes aside, we'll be expanding the lore from my recent short/TikTok and adding the new ones. You might realize that I did not analyze Project Stuzha and Rhindaughter in those videos. Well, that's because there's a lot of things to go with that moment. I also haven't watched other lore videos to make this, so I'm going completely blind in order to avoid similarities. As always, don't forget to give this video a like or comment so the channel can be noticed by the algorithm. My name is Neko Gitsune and I make lore and commentary videos on the channel to keep you company. Before we continue, I just want to let you guys know that I am opening art commissions on Vgen. If you're interested in supporting this channel, click the link in the description or pinned comment and check my portfolio there if you're interested. Alright, now back to the video. Now remember, there will be my opinions and theories sprinkled along the way. You don't have to agree with me, but don't be offended over disagreements or opinions whether from the video itself or from the other comments. Remember, it's just a game, it's not that deep, and don't take it seriously. Also, no lore leaks in the comments. I won't gatekeep you with gameplay leaks, but don't talk about lore or story related leaks here. Yes, from now on, I'll be reminding you of this so I won't see any offensive comments below, so deal with it. Okay, here are interesting details you need to know from the Sudden Snow trailer. This is Tsaritsa. She is a Hydrovision user and appears to be a fae belonging to the Siren race. She is very famous in Snezhnaya as a key singer of the Korolov troupe. However, what's interesting is that the trailer doesn't introduce her through her singing. Instead, one of the first things she discusses with Alyosha is how the rules of Teyvat might be more of a curse than a blessing.
I've heard that the rules that govern this world are all essentially curses. So to live by the rules means to suffer under the sum of all curses.
That immediately places her alongside characters who questions the world itself, which is a surprisingly heavy topic for someone introduced as an opera singer. Now there's a huge reason why that's the case. First of all, it's not surprising that Tsaritsa herself is a fae. We just don't know for certain which race she belongs to. We know she is a fae because of Linnea's description about her, which I'll talk about in a bit, and she possessed tattoos that can also be found on Linnea's thigh, Vesna's back, and Noi's neck, who are also under the Snowland phase. These phases are created by the first angel, Koitar, who wanted to rebel against the heavenly principles, also known as Fae-niece. Regardless, what did Tsaritsa say?
If it's true that rules are curses, well then, there's only two options. Either we overthrow the rules, or... Were you going to say follow them? Get used to them? It's neither. We find a way to transcend the rules.
Now this is interesting because even the name of the trailer says Transcendence Trailer. If you're like me whose English is not their first language, then let me tell you the difference between Tsaritsa's first option and third option. So, the first thing she said is overthrow, which in this case means you destroy the rules. The best example of this is Fae-niece recreate the existing rules of Teyvat anew and Nibelang waging war on them when he returned. That is the meaning of overthrow. As for transcend, in literal sense, it means going up, surpassing physical boundaries and achieving a state beyond the material world. But in Genshin's context, it means to go beyond a limitation without necessarily destroying it. The rule still exists, but it no longer controls you in the same way. One possible example is what Tsaritsa appears to be doing right now. She doesn't like fate, but rather destroying it completely, she works around it. Columbina ascended as the new moon goddess, and this already recreates fate anew. The Irminsul burnt and fate did not disappear, it's just creating even more branching possibilities. While the Tsaritsa is not within the transcended state just yet, she is working around that concept. The rules are still there, she is just working around it. This gives an impression that despite Tsaritsa being a cute girl who sings in an opera, it seems she plays a bigger role within the political state of Snezhnaya. Now, believe it or not, we have heard of her in the game already from Linnea, and what she said about her is very interesting.
Audiences at the Opera House go crazy for her, completely unaware that all they're hearing is the echo of the ocean waves. I'm sure she has her reasons, but I can sense an allure hidden deep within her singing voice that, if ever unleashed, would bewitch everyone within earshot and sentence them to certain doom!
So basically, for what we learned from Linnea, we never heard her singing in the trailer. In reality, these are just ocean waves packaged to become voices heard by the audience. Now, like Linnea said, I do think she did this for her own reasons, but judging from what she said, it doesn't seem like the Siren race are like Tsaritsa. If anything, I wouldn't be surprised if the Sirens are just ordinary singers. Of course, we can't leave out the possibility that their voices could be dangerous and is actually their power. After all, they were created to rebel against the heavenly principles if we were to remember their origins from Finale of the Deep Galleries and Celestial Gift. With that context, it's not out of the realm of possibility that Tsaritsa's voice is very dangerous and maybe way more than the ordinary sirens. That being said, however, I believe Tsaritsa and her troop might be a group of assassins, or at least work behind the scenes for Snezhnaya's political government. Tsaritsa is not the only person in this matter, because Alyosha and Odette were working behind the scenes to murder a certain NPC that seems to be involved in Project Stuzha later on. Speaking of Alyosha, let's move on to the next topic. This is Alyosha, a character who was already teased during Snezhnaya's first preview and wields an Electro-Vision. Based on his appearance, there is a possibility that he is under the care of a group called Cernareka, a place that is inhabited by the Fae under the Volkodzlak race. It doesn't seem that Alyosha is a Fae himself, as he looks very human. He doesn't have the tattoos, or at least what we were shown have none of that, and he doesn't have wolf ears like how they showed the Volkodzlak enemies on the first Snezhnaya teaser. If I were to guess, it seems his circumstances is just like Razor, where he is an ordinary human, but was taken care of by the wolves. In Alyosha's case, he might be an orphan himself and he's being taken care of by the Volkodzlak Fae. There is a slimmer possibility that he is half Fae since he is friends with Tsaritsa, but I would take this with a grain of salt since he doesn't seem to understand what Tsaritsa said during their conversation. Of course, these are just my speculations for now because we don't really know anything about him, so whether these are true or not remains to be seen. Speaking of Volkodzlak, this reminds me of Boreas because even though his powers originated from Koitar in Outcry, it was said that he came from the north, which of course only Snezhnaya comes into the realm of possibility. With Snezhnaya now introducing a wolf-associated Fae race, it becomes easier to imagine a connection between Boreas and the Volkodzlak. Whether he was one of them, related to them, or simply shared a common origin remains unknown. This is Odette. She uses a Cryostellar Linchpin, which likely makes her Sandrina Stellar conduct support. You might notice that I don't talk much about her in my short/TikTok, which, well, that's because there's nothing to talk about her. However, I know you're here to talk about deep analysis, so let me indulge you with my little curiosity and delusional speculations. So, based on what we see, it seems Odette is one of those characters within the category of talk less, more action. She does not participate within Tsaritsa and Alyosha's conversation and starts taking action. Presumably the trio already planned this prior to their performance. Out of the three, Odette seems to work under stealth since she suddenly appears out of thin air during her Stellar Linchpin reveal. Now, if you notice that frame, she is suddenly surrounded with black feathers instead of white. At first glance, that might seem like a stylistic effect, and you might even connect her to ravens because they usually symbolize death. But black feathers are a strange choice for a character whose entire design is dominated by white. Now, this is interesting because Odette, by name at least, is taken from a Russian ballad called Swan Lake. To put it simply, the story of Swan Lake is about a prince named Siegfried who is transfixed with Princess Odette, the White Swan Princess. In that story, Siegfried is about to celebrate his coming-age birthday, and his mother wants him to find a bride to continue the royal bloodline. He eventually found the White Swan Princess named Odette, who was cursed by wizard Rothbart to become a swan by day and human at night. Fast forward a bit, Siegfried wants to marry Odette and created a vow with her, but Rothbart, who knew about this, sent his daughter Rodile, also known as the Black Swan Princess, to trick Siegfried and break the vow so that Odette becomes a swan forever. The ending of this story varies depending on the version, but that's not relevant for this video. What's relevant is that Odette and Odile are usually played by the same dancer. If we take that story in Genshin's version of Odette, here's the version I can think of. First, it's possible that Odette in-game is a combination of both Odette and Odile. If I were to guess, she may represent both the White Swan and the Black Swan, not necessarily having bipolar personality, although that would be cool, but rather a side where she is a calm and collected girl, but also a calculating assassin at the same time. When she is about to assassinate someone, that's when her black feather shows up, symbolizing her playing as the Black Swan. So even though she is doing her job off stage, she is doing her job as a ballerina behind the scenes. That's just my 2 cents for now, so don't take it too seriously. Now these are characters associated with Korolovyeski troupe, Vgenitsa, Alyosha, and Odette. However, I don't think Alyosha is part of the troupe, but rather a partner, if you will. I see him as a mercenary rather than a troupe member because his design looks a little bit too rough to be a performer. His role in the trailer also feels different from the other two. While Vgenitsa performs and Odette operates from the shadows, Alyosha feels more like an outside collaborator than a member of the troupe itself. But even so, I think he is at least close enough with Vgenitsa and Odette as he is able to talk with Vgenitsa casually behind the scenes, and she is comfortable enough to say Odette's name as Lelek to Alyosha, which could imply that he might call her the same way, or at least know she is called that way by Vgenitsa. Now normally I would talk about Valerie, the VIII, and Project Stuzha because that's the next scene, but I want to save this for later after I talk about Mitya since Project Stuzha is very likely related to Ronova, the Tsaritsa, Krasnik's Torch, and Rhine-Daughter at the end. This is Vesna, a fae under the Villa race from a group known as the Druzhna, and originally Snezhnaya's defense forces like the Knights of Avonius and Milalith. However, it seems that they are now able to reunite under the Tsaritsa's banner, or at least attempt to. She wields an Anemo Stellar Linchpin, making her a Stellar Swirl character. There's one thing I need to correct. You see, I thought that the Druzhna was disbanded. It turns out that the wording is a bit ambiguous and it was never disbanded, but they were never mastered by the Tsaritsa. In other words, they were never utilized, or you can say they were ignored to some degree. Okay, maybe ignore is too strong of a word here. Let's just say they were never utilized or were not used enough by the Tsaritsa for her plan. Based on the previous previews we got so far, the Druzhnas seems to consist of the faes under the Villa race. Villas were first oppressed by Mstislav, a fae nobility under the race of Volkotzlak. Thanks to Belitsar, the Villas were freed from Mstislav, and as implied in the Sudden Snow trailer and the NPCs, it seems they became the Druzhna to serve for Belitsar. With that being the case, it kinda makes this scene of Vesna more sad because the Druzhna remains loyal despite no longer being the Tsaritsa's primary instrument. Let's say that she did master the Druzhna, and even if she does, she likely uses them only within Snezhnaya. It's very possible that the Tsaritsa indeed abandoned these defense forces, but eventually brought them back because from the same book, it is said that the Tsaritsa established the Imperial Order Reformation Edict. We don't know what this edict was about, but it is said that the fae nobilities were deeply grateful for the Tsaritsa's mercy in this matter. Most of them left Snezhnaya voluntarily and forsook their princely titles, but it seems a lot of them still remain in Snezhnaya, with the Druzhnas being one of them. As implied in one of the NPCs you can talk to at Millhaven, Vesna is implied to not know an ancient perfume formula, which could imply that Vesna is one of the Fey nobility that did not leave Snezhnaya and stayed loyal towards the Tsaritsa because of the Druzhna's history. Now, it's fairly possible she doesn't know because of her being a younger Fey compared to others, but from the way the NPC talked with words such as Miss Vesna of the Druzhna included, then she is likely one of the higher ranking of the Fate nobilities or higher ranking of the Druzhna. Regardless of what rank she is in, one thing is clear. The Druzhnas, despite not being the Tsaritsa's primary instrument, remains loyal towards the Tsaritsa. Even with the Fatui showing cracks or even betraying the Tsaritsa, the Druzhnas did not show the same behavior from what is implied so far. I suppose you can say this introduction of her shows what Snezhnaya used to look like with bright colors all over the place. Next is Dianka. Now, there really isn't much to say about her other than she looks like someone from the Adventurers Guild due to how familiar her color schemes are in her design. If anything, she kinda looks like Catherine, as in Catherine after being so done with Root Adventurers, if you will, and Sandrone modified her to become a combat maid. Well, it's a bit within the realm of possibility, since the Adventurers Guild's main headquarters is in Snezhnaya, so I wouldn't be surprised if there's even such Catherine there. For now, my crack theory is that she might be some sort of specialized Catherine variant, perhaps one designed for combat rather than receptionist work, but I have absolutely no evidence for that besides her design. In other words, I got nothing, this is just a violent Catherine. This is Noi. Based on his dialogue, he appears to be a Fey who lived during the Tsar's reign. He is also subtly mentioned in Flintz's character story tree, which could imply a quiet rivalry between the two. That's what I mentioned in my short/TikTok, but since it's short form content, obviously we need more context. You have to read his character story tree and character story 5 as they are connected to each other, which is why I am here to explain everything. So for context, Flintz was a Fey nobility under the race of Lantern Fey, one of the less common races within the Snowland Fays. Before he became the Flintz we know today, he used to be called Kirill the Azure Flame, whose role was to guide the souls of the dead across the icy plains. He was not a nobility for too long, but he did witness the transition of power from Belisar to the Tsaritsa. He was powerless to change the political picture at that time, which is why he decided to go on a self-imposed exile to not cry and live at the Final Night Cemetery instead. After he left, it was implied that the blue fire that used to lit at Snezhnaya slowly faded away, which was then replaced by the red fire as people accepted the new regime. Since No is visually associated with red flames and Flintz's character stories specifically describe red flames replacing the old blue flames after his departure, there may be a connection between the two. Whether Noi is literally responsible for that transition or simply represents the same ideal remains unclear, but the symbolism is difficult to ignore. Now, just because Noi replaced Flintz's job doesn't mean he is younger than Flintz. Considering what he said in the trailer, Noi speaks as though he personally witnessed events from an earlier era of Snezhnaya.
Compared to the eons gone by, this is a peaceful age.
Whether that means he is older than Flintz or simply lived through the same historical period remains unclear. Either that, or he may be the same age as Flintz, and what he is implying in the trailer is the Cataclysm. Regardless which is which, the closest I can think of right now is that he might be related to the red fire mentioned in Flintz's character story as the representation of Snezhnaya's new regime, while Flintz is the older representation of that ideal. This is Mitya. From a distance, it looks like he wields an animal vision or stellar linchpin, but there's also another possibility that he wields a geovision or stellar linchpin. He also mentions something called the Crestic Torch, and as far as we know, this is an object that helps keep Snezhnaya warm. For Mitya, there's not much I can talk about other than he might be an astrologist based on his visual design alone. There's also a very slim chance that he knows Albedo. If you remember the Paralogism Arc Conquest, there's a letter sent to him by a distant friend. We have no idea who this friend is, and there was never a mention or hint from anywhere, so this distant friend might be Mitya. Again, I don't have enough evidence for this, so I won't go too deep for this one. In this frame, Mitya is not the important part. It is the Kresnik's torch, which if you don't know, this particular architecture right in front of Mitya seems to be the said object. So, the Kresnik's torch was already shown to us at the previous Snezhnaya teaser. They show us this object for a few seconds before cutting it to Pulcinella. According to Columbina, every city in Snezhnaya is built with one of these. There are multiple cities in Snezhnaya, with Snezhnograd, Glupov, and Novokitashgrad being few that we know of so far. So the fact that a Kresnik's torch got frozen in this trailer seems to be crucial, because without it, the whole city will be frozen as we see in that trailer, and we even saw Ronova standing in front of a frozen Kresnik's torch later on. I believe this is related to Project Stuzha, which is a good transition where we get to Valerie, Project Stuzha, and of course, Ronova, Rheindotter, Nibirius, and the Tsaritsa. Again, you already know the drill at this point. This took me a few days to make, and of course, I have to do a lot of observation in order to make this video. So if you can hit that like and subscribe button, you're helping this channel to be pushed by the algorithm, and you're basically telling me that I'm doing a good job. With that said, let's continue. This is my husband, Valerie. Shut up, I know all Hitop is my husband, but who says you can't have two anime husbands, Let me have my moment here. Anyways, Valerie was previously mentioned by a Fatui soldier named Onyx Agate from the last Trials of the Brave Warrior event, and now we finally get to see him in person. There's a likely chance that he is the missing 10th Harbinger. That's what I said in the shorts, but of course, there's more context to that. As you can see, Valerie should have been mentioned earlier because he was shown when Alyosha tries to assassinate an NPC. The reason I mention him now is because Valerie is a member of the Fatui as Onyx Agate, an already Fatui soldier before he was dispatched to not quite understand Rena's orders, was Valerie's student. This NPC here seems to be an ability in Snezhnaya, not necessarily a Fey ability, just someone who is important enough that Valerie has to protect him at all costs. We eventually see this NPC again in the next scene where the Fatui and the other nobility talk about Project Stuzha, which could imply that Valerie succeeded in defending this man. That being said, Valerie is a high ranking within the Fatui known as Major Valerie. With that high of a rank, it's within the realm of possibility that Valerie is a Fatui Harbinger, more specifically, the unmentioned 10th seat of the Harbinger. It seems to be his real name, like how Arlecchino and Tartaglia's real names are Perwer and Ajax. At least, that's what I thought at first. I actually did a bit of research, and while Valerie is not a name you see in Commedia dell'arte, there's the Italian version of this name, Valerio. Valerio belongs to the Innamorati archetype in the Commedia dell'arte. Look, I'm trying my best, my lisp is getting in the way, okay? Most of the Harbingers we know come from the other archetypes, but Toyo rarely adapts to his characters literally. After all, Pierrot became Pierrot, Scaramuccia became Scaramouche, and Colombina became Colombina. The references matter, but they don't automatically tell us who a character is. This is the reason why I always say to never take references into face value, because we don't know for certain why Hoyo deliberately chose these names. Even the Goetic names from the Archons or gods in this game do not show the same behavior like how the real Goetic demons behave. Anyways, the point is that Valerie is a name that appears in Commedia dell'arte, more specifically the Russian version of Valerio. Valerio plays a typical romantic male lead that is unmasked alongside other characters for comedic plots and scenarios. His personality is young, graceful, emotional, and well-educated. He is known to be idealistic, often to intense, lovesick displays. That's the basic information of Valerio, and it seems they took Valerio's idealistic, graceful, and well-educated trait as part of Valerie's character. They even introduced him as Valerie, which is already unlike other Harbingers who were introduced as their codenames. This could imply that this is his real name after all, like how Valerio is an unmasked character. At least, that's the impression the trailer gives us. With the similarity between these names and what the current lore suggests from the previous Trials of the Brave Warrior event, there is a possibility that Valerie is the 10th Harbinger. If he isn't, then at the very least, he is a high ranking within the Fatui as he defended an NPC that seems to be heavily involved in Project Stuzha meeting. Since we introduced all of the future playable characters, this is where we move on to the bigger topic. So after the Odette scene, the scene shifts to a political meeting that seems to take place in Snezhnaya, a political house that is similar to Fontaine's Palais Memonia. This is also the place where the mayor of Snezhnaya held his meeting, and Joanna Ivanovna N, Mage J from the Hexen Circle, was the first mayor of Snezhnaya that was personally appointed by the Tsaritsa. Anyways, in this meeting, Pulcinella was about to declare to extend Project Stuzha, yet the NPCs, including the one that Valerie just defended, object to extending the project. The Harbinger sighs and Pantalone just smirks. Now there are a few details that matter here, but before you ask where's Piero, it actually makes sense why he is not here. Now true, Piero and Pulcinella led this project directly. But remember, Piero is the director of the VIII, and while it would have been more logical for him to attend, Pulcinella leading is a safer bet in this matter because he was always been the mayor of Snezhnaya and seems to be far more capable in public or political outcry than Piero. Besides, a lot of the time, Piero is always shown in a more discreet manner and he is likely somewhere else behind the scenes to attend with even more pressing matters regarding Snezhnaya and the Tsaritsa's plan. As for the nobilities objecting, this is interesting because we know from Liben that Project Stuzha has been consuming a lot of energy, which is the reason why Liben found it to be a great business opportunity for himself. That's not really the point, it's the fact that Project Stuzha might be a lot more controversial than we thought. Each faction might have lost a lot of resources, hence why they object. And the Harbinger sighing might give us a clue that they already expected the nobilities to object in extending the project. Now here's where I start entering crack theory territory. The very first person to object is the same NPC Valerie protected earlier. Does this automatically mean Valerie opposes Project Stuzha? Not necessarily. Protecting someone does not mean you share their views. However, I do find it interesting that Hoyo deliberately connected these two scenes together. If this NPC becomes important later, then Valerie's decision to protect him may end up telling us a lot more about where Valerie stands politically. If anything, what if I tell you that the VIII might actually be open in the nobilities objecting in the first place? The VIII Harbingers expected it, and even Pantalone just smirks as if he fully expected it and might even find this useful for his future plans. Remember, Pantalone is also heavily involved in this project, so for someone who is very well versed in economics, his smirk seems to imply he has a bigger plan at play for the project. I also find this interesting because it suggests Snezhnaya's government may be more politically complex than we initially thought. The nobles are allowed to openly object, the Harbingers seem to expect it, and nobody is immediately silenced for speaking against the proposal. Whether this means Snezhnaya has a functioning political council, or whether the Tsaritsa simply allows debate among the nobility remains to be seen. Now, despite all of this Snezhnaya teaser so far, we still don't know what Project Stuzha actually is. What we do know is that it consumes an enormous amount of energy, has become controversial enough that even Snezhnaya's nobility openly objects to extending it, and according to Columbina, it is connected to something called Mistletoe. If that name sounds familiar, it's because Mistletoe comes from Norse mythology. Depending on the version of the story, it is either a magical sword or a weapon associated with destruction and fate. In one saga, it was owned by Thrain and later wielded by Hromundur Gripson. Once again, Hoyo is borrowing a mythological reference, but whether Project Stuzha is actually creating a weapon, powering a weapon, or using Mistletoe as a codename remains completely unknown. What is clear, however, is that whatever Project Stuzha is doing, it is consuming a tremendous amounts of resources and seems to be affecting every major faction in Snezhnaya. With Project Stuzha covered, this is where we shift into the big guns. This is the ruler of death, Ronova. She cuts a photograph, but it seems to symbolize something much larger, possibly causing away a memory or even an event from Irminsul itself. Based on what Dottore and Hymns of the Far North says, she appears to be removing a piece of history connected to Saarelainen, the third descender. This could explain why the Tsaritsa has been hunting the Gnosis all this time. Now, typically, I would extend the context of this, but we need to meet the Cryo Archon first. The context matters, I promise. This is the Tsaritsa herself, Anastasia Fyodorovna Snezhnaya. Based on her dialogue, she seems to have a direct conflict with Ronova and even states that death is not the enemy of love.
Death is not the enemy of love. The real enemy is the blessings given by deluded gods.
This heavily implies that the Tsaritsa's ideal may truly be love after all, making Yohwalta Chuftin's words during Atlan's Heart Conquest even more meaningful. I know that is basically what I said in my shorts, but why do I have to mention all of them at the same time? Well, that's because of what Anastasia said. Death is not the enemy of love. Which could imply that despite having her lover and potentially her child die, she never hated Ronova in the first place, and she knew that death will happen to everyone. If that line is indeed referring to VIII, then it would suggest that Anastasia's conflict was never truly with Ronova. Instead, her resentment may be directed towards the system that created the circumstances in the first place. You also have to remember that Yohwalta Chuftin praised Ronova, calling her act as an expression of love and reparation.
It was an expression of love, as well as an act of reparation.
But this act was seen as her having to significantly overstep her authority as a shade, thus angered VIII.
She was seen as having significantly overstepped her authorities as a shade, which quite displeased the almighty heavenly principles.
Interesting, isn't it? After angered her creator, Ronova fell into self-pity and no longer cared if others discussed her existence. With that context, I suspect that Anastasia and Ronova might have been close at some point, and Anastasia hated the fact that Ronova was forced to act the way she did, which in this scene, she was shown to cut a photograph that seems to be Anastasia and her family. So far from the implied lore, Anastasia and the third descender named Saarelainen fell in love with each other. They were never married, but they were implied to be interested in each other. Anastasia's father, named Pakkaisuko, also implied to be Belitsar but not fully confirmed, will accept Saarelainen's proposal if he could open the gates of Pohjola. While he did just that, this angered VIII and he was carved into 7 noses. We further got more context in this update where, according to the tourist words in Anomalous Tree Marrow, he was erased and the method of that erasure was unknown. Now, does this mean VIII is ultimately wrong? Not really. If you read Wings of the Silent Moon, it is heavily implied that Pohjola is somewhere near the Irminsul tree and is actually a gate to the abyss. If Pohjola truly serves as a gateway to the abyss, then VIII's reaction becomes far more understandable. From their perspective, Saarelainen may have opened a path to something capable of threatening the entire world. But this adds even more layers because in the book and the wing, VIII was found inside Pohjola, which adds even more mystery, doesn't it? Why was VIII found inside somewhere that is abyssal? If Pohjola was truly nothing more than a gate of monsters, then VIII's presence there becomes difficult to explain. But if Pohjola contains something more than just the abyss, then Saarelainen's actions and VIII's response becomes far more complicated. Another thing that I want to note is the fact that Saarelainen was erased, which could imply that the method of erasure is something similar to how Scaramouche deleted himself and become Wanderer. With Ronova cutting the photograph, this could imply that Saarelainen's case might have been erased from the Irminsul. However, there is something you need to remember about Irminsul tampering. Just because you are deleted from the Irminsul doesn't mean your deeds are erased, nor will it completely change the events that happened in the past. Rukkhadevata was erased by Nahida, yet her deeds still happened. It's the same case with Scaramouche, but no one in the Tatakasuna incident was saved. What happened instead is that the history fills the gaps on its own, like how Nahida is now known as the original Dendro Archon, while Scaramouche's case was filled with a mysterious person. However, there's something else you need to note. Saarelainen is a descender, meaning his actions are not recorded in the Irminsul. So the fact Ronova cuts him off means he eventually got recorded by the Irminsul, possibly because of him having a child with Anastasia. But even with that, his records remained in Teyvat, as you can actually preserve its records despite being tampered with, and that is within the disguise of fairy tales or literature. Hymns of the Far North increasingly appear to function as a preserved version of history written by the Hyperboreans guided by the Voyager's guidance in forms of hymns and poetry implied in the notes you can find at Sanctum of the Oathbearer. She is not someone from Teyvat, and considering she knew how Teyvat works thanks to Koitak who told her everything, then the reason the names in Hymns of the Far North not matching with the actual characters makes sense now, because they were made to preserve the true history of the past. Remember, no one in that book was written using their real names, including the third descender whose name is Saarelainen, but that is not his real name either. That's just what the Hyperboreans called him, and it's likely intentional as everything in that book has strange lines and timelines. Now we talk about the possibility of Ronova erasing the third descender from the Irminsul by cutting the photograph of him and Anastasia with her son. Now her son is interesting because his eyes are Khaenri'an eyes. Now whether this child is a Khaenri'an or not remains unclear, and if anything, he raises more questions than answers because Ronova cuts the third descender, but not the child. If the child truly inherited something from the third descender, then it raises an interesting question. Why does Ronova's action appear to focus on Saarelainen, but not the child? Even though the child is from Teyvat, he carries the blood of Saarelainen. Was the child preserved intentionally, or is there something about him that makes his case different? Regardless of what it is, this child seems important enough and might be the trigger why Anastasia wanted to rebel in the first place, as there might be a chance that he is connected to the Cataclysm. Not necessarily as the trigger, as we already know the main reason why the Cataclysm started, but I would imagine him as someone who got affected by the event. Remember, Anastasia witnessed what happened during the Cataclysm and is the most affected Archon. So if she saw everything that happened and her child was affected by it, it might be one of the factors why Anastasia did what she did, but not necessarily the main trigger why. Let's say this, she already lost her husband, presumably Saarelainen in this case. She was already upset, but she tries to understand why, but losing her child and possibly the memory of her husband is the last straw. It's very interesting when you think about it because Anastasia may not be angry at Ronova specifically, but at the system she was forced to serve. Ronova created the Night Kingdom alongside Yahual de Judin, and in its own way, that was an act of love. She rebuilt Snotland's broken ley lines so that the dead could live on through memory, allowing their stories to be preserved even after death. So if her cutting the photograph truly symbolizes the erasure of Saarelainen from history, then Anastasia's confrontation with Ronova becomes far more tragic. For someone who devoted herself to preserving the memories of the dead, it is deeply ironic that she now stands accused of cutting away a memory of familial love. Perhaps that is why Anastasia does not see death as the enemy of love. The enemy, in her eyes, may be a world where even memories themselves can be taken away. Remember, Anastasia's ideal as the Cryo Archon is love. So even though she experienced this tragedy from a personal standpoint, she was far from the only person who suffered. The Cataclysm left countless victims across Teyvat, and perhaps no nation bore that burden more heavily than Khaenri'ah. This might explain why multiple Khaenri'ans eventually found their way into the Fatui. Piero, as the first and most devoted Fatui, chose to stand by Anastasia's side. Whether that was because she truly understood his pain or because she shared the same desire to challenge the world that caused it, one thing is clear. The Fatui were built upon people who had lost something. Finally, the Gnosis scene. We finally get to see all 6 collected Gnosis, with the Pyronosis remaining missing after it was used to burn the Irminsul. The Gnosis are indeed chess pieces, as they were used in Winter Night Lazo, the Archon Quest as Paimon actually refers to it, and the most recent one, Sudden Snow. Now what the other Gnosis represent is not that important for now, as they are already out of the game. What matters is the Cryo Gnosis and the Geonosis. You might encounter this particular Japanese post before talking about the chess game that seems to be the main reference of what is shown in the trailer. This game is from the Alexander Alekhine vs Fred Dewhurst Yates in 1922, and the placement is actually quite similar. Let me explain what they said in the simplest way possible. White is the Archons, black is Phaenix, the Cryonosis is the king piece, the Geonosis is the rook piece, while the black rook piece is representing Ronova. In the trailer, it looks like Ronova is threatening Anastasia, but she is actually undefended and vulnerable. Therefore, this makes black vulnerable so white can easily capture it. In the original game, black rook eventually moved to f8 to defend the black king, but Alekhine eventually moved both rooks to g7 and h7, delivering decisive victory. With that being the case, the chess position symbolizes Anastasia with the help of Zhongli defeated Phaenix. Now at first glance, I believe this. However, one thing they forgot to mention is the fact that Anastasia moved her Gnosis to g5, therefore making the Cryonosis far more vulnerable than it actually is. If we follow the chess position literally, that move actually puts the Cryonosis in a far more vulnerable position than before. It is now black's turn, meaning the black rook can simply capture it. Ironically, this is why I think the move makes sense narratively. After the Anastasia froze her son flashback, the scene changes to her directly approaching Ronova in front of the frozen Krasnik's torch. In other words, Anastasia is willingly placing herself in danger. She is the one advancing towards Ronova, not the other way around. But remember what Piero said.
In this war, not even a single pawn may be spared. Because on this chessboard, checkmate is not where the game ends.
In this chessboard, checkmate is not where the game ends, because in that same frame, we see a white king that is already captured. Yet the game continues with Anastasia as the new king piece. Whether the Cryonosis is captured by the black rook or not is not that important. It's the fact that Anastasia is bold enough to make a risky move that puts her in a very vulnerable position, and I believe she herself knew that she is not a match with Ronova. Now we have to acknowledge why Zhongli's Gnosis is still in the game. Remember, every nation in the game has their stories already resolved, except Mavuika's, and there might be a deeper meaning to her Gnosis missing. Whether it relates to Marijiva later on remains to be seen, but most nations have their Gnosis taken away with a resolved storyline. A doesn't need her Gnosis, and it was eventually taken by the Torah in Sumeru, along with the Dendro Gnosis for an exchange of knowledge and his segments, while Hydro Gnosis was taken because it fulfilled its job to save Fontaine. Zhongli's case is somewhat resolved with him giving away his Gnosis under a contract to end all contracts, but until today, we have no idea, not even a single crumbs or clues on what this contract is. I haven't even mentioned Fenty yet because of his statue that seems to play more in the story, and Anastasia cuts her ties with him as implied in Mondstadt's Arconquest. Zhongli remains silent, and I believe this contract is the reason why Zhongli's Gnosis is still in the game. Zhongli said it himself at the end of Liyue's Arconquest that we'll find out the answer throughout our journey, and that moment seems to be this time. Personally, I believe they will reveal this contract in the next Lantern Rite. Heck, I think this will explain Zhongli's true identity as the Heaven's Star. Remember, Zhongli is the oldest Archon in the game, and was already born before Archonhood that predates the funerary year as implied in Tsubai's character story too. What I'm trying to say is the fact that Zhongli's identity is important for Anastasia down the line to defeat Phaenix. After Anastasia moved her Gnosis, Daughter says this.
Good move. Still, I do hope you truly understand the nature of the game you're playing.
Now, I don't think this line is random because with Anastasia putting her Gnosis in a very vulnerable position, Daughter's words basically acknowledge the fact that Anastasia is taking a bold move despite the huge risk. Daughter is not questioning Anastasia's courage. She already acknowledged the move as a good one. The warning comes afterward. What exactly is the victory condition here? If Phaenix falls, what replaces them? If fate is shattered, who takes responsibility for the world afterward? Defeating the current system and building a better one are two completely different challenges. To me, this is why Granddaughter calls it a game. Not because she treats it lightly, but because every move carries consequences far beyond the player making it. Anastasia may be fighting for love, memories, and the people she lost. But if she succeeds, then someone must answer the question that comes afterward. What replaces the world that Phaenix built? Finally, before we end this video, let's ask ourselves this question. Why is Granddaughter playing a chess with Anastasia, even though she carries Nibirius' consciousness with her? There are two possibilities here. Either Granddaughter came to warn Anastasia, or two, she made a bargain with her. Both are possible, and if anything, I think the answer can be both. While confronting Ronova, Anastasia emits power that is not just cryo, but also the power of life. You can see it from the power she emits that looks remarkably similar to the Ruler of Life's power in the God's Limits trailer. Since Granddaughter appears at the very moment Anastasia reveals this power, it raises the possibility that the two have already reached some form of understanding or agreement. If that is the case, then this meeting may not only involve Granddaughter herself, but also Nibirius' influence behind the scenes. Whether she allowed it or not remains to be seen, but one thing for certain, Granddaughter will play a bigger role in Snezhnaya. It's not whether Granddaughter supports Anastasia, but the fact that she understands the cost of rebellion better than almost anyone in Teyvat. If anyone knows what happens when someone tries to challenge the laws of this world, it would be the woman whose actions helped trigger the cataclysm itself and one of the 5 sinners of Khaenri'ah. Remember, currently Phaenix is asleep, and this is the chance for Anastasia to rebel. After all, remember what Granddaughter said in God's Limits trailer.
The heavenly principles have yet to awaken. If I were her, I wouldn't pass on that opportunity either.
What might her role be in Snezhnaya? Well, that's a topic for a future video. So perhaps the real question isn't whether Anastasia wants to defeat Phaenix. I think that part is obvious for now. The bigger question is what comes after. If Phaenix truly falls, does Teyvat survive? Does fate disappear? Does the abyss invade? Or is Anastasia trying to do exactly what Vgen suggested at the beginning of the trailer? Not overthrow the rules, but transcend them. If anything, I find Anastasia as a complex strategist. She knew what became of Nibelheim, so she did not master the power of the Abyss as proven by the game multiple times already. There are costs and uncertainty, whether that be Columbina returning as the Soul Moon Goddess and restoring the 3 Moon authorities to Teyvat, the burning of Verminsoul, directly confronting Ronova despite the difference in power, or even the disappearance of the Pyronosis. If anything, she might have expected the unexpected. If her true goal was to transcend the rules, then this was never a rebellion against the gods. It was an attempt to create a world where people no longer have to suffer under the same fates that took everything from her. In the end, her end goal is very complex, and even for me, I can't really pinpoint what she is trying to do because it's not as simple as revive the third descender by gathering all of the Gnosis. There are a lot of things that happened across our journey related to the Fatui and what we might expect in Snezhnaya, but we never really know what Anastasia's goal is other than gathering the Gnosis. As to what might answer that question, well, that's only for us to find out once Snezhnaya is out. Well, that's quite a long analysis, eh? But I think I fed you with a lot of thoughts today. We explore all of the potential lore behind the playable characters, we analyze the Fatui, Project Stuzha, Anastasia, and the Shades. I try not to theorize Anastasia's end goal because again, I really don't know, and I don't want to overpromise anything. That said, I think that's also the charm that Hoyo made because they did a really good job at hiding what her end goal is for the past 6 years of this game running, which makes Snezhnaya's release even more exciting. Whether Anastasia is trying to defeat Phaenix, transcend the rules of Teyvat, create a new system, or something entirely different, one thing is certain. Snezhnaya is shaping up to be the most important chapters in Genshin's story, if not a big climax of Teyvat's chapter before a journey to Khaenri'ah. Honestly, I'm excited to see what they're cooking up, and I'll be sure to make a deep analysis like this one once Snezhnaya is out. I really hope you enjoyed this video, and I'll see you on the next one. Tana!